This is an informational text titled, What is Cultural Identity? Children begin to develop a sense of identity as individuals and as members of groups from their earliest interactions with others. One of my first questions is, what is one example of a group that a child might be part of? So, talking about this first sentence here, when it says that children begin to develop a sense of identity as a member of a group, what would be one group that they would be a member of? One of the most basic types of identity is ethnic identity, which entails an awareness of one's membership in a social group that has a common culture. And so, my question is, what does the word ethnic mean? And then, what's an example of an ethnic group? Okay. The common culture may be marked by a shared language, history, geography, and frequently or often physical characteristics. So, a common cultural group might have those things in common. That's what makes it part of that. They have those things, and that makes it part of their culture. Not all of these aspects need to be shared, however, for people to psychologically identify with a particular ethnic group. So, what does the word psychological mean? What root words and base words do you hear in that? And what do those word parts mean? And then, how do you think a person can psychologically belong to an ethnic group? So, besides the physical part, how could you psychologically belong to an ethnic group? Cultural identity is a broader term. People from multiple ethnic backgrounds may identify as belonging to the same culture. So, okay, for example, in the Caribbean and South America, several ethnic groups might share a broader, common Latin culture, even though they're from two different places. Social groups exist within one nation might share a common language and a broad cultural identity, but have distinct ethnic identities associated with a different language and history. Ethnic groups in the United States are an example of this. Can you think of an ethnic group within the United States? Can you think of a group, a social group within the United States that would have its own identity? So we would be American or belonging to the United States of America, but what might be an ethnic group within that society, within that group of people? Okay, so now let's look at the definition of culture, and let's talk about this idea of being having like an invisibility within our own culture. I'm going to make this a little bigger. Okay. Anthropologists and other scholars continue to debate the meaning of this term. And so the term they're talking about is culture. What does culture mean? So here's a definition. It says Garcia refers to culture as a system of understanding characteristics of that individual's society or some subgroup of that society. So basically, over here on the side, he defines culture as characteristics that make up a person's society. So the characteristics that make up a person's social group. And that includes values, beliefs, acceptable and unacceptable behavior, ideas, and rules. So he goes on to say this system of understanding includes values, beliefs, notion about acceptable and unacceptable behavior, and other socially constructed ideas that members of the society are taught are true. So let's talk for a minute about this idea of socially constructed idea. So I'm going to come over here to the question. What do you think socially constructed means? Think about what you hear in that word. What does it mean socially? And then what does constructed mean? And then how do those two things go together? And then how can an idea be socially constructed? So think about the meaning and then think about how an idea could fit that definition. Gertz asserts that members of cultures go about their daily lives within shared webs of meaning. So if we link Garcia and Gertz's these two definitions, we can imagine culture as invisible webs composed of values and beliefs, ideas about appropriate behavior, and socially constructed truths. So he's referring to them as invisible webs. Let's talk more about that. So you might ask, why is culture made up of invisible webs? Most of the time, our own culture, so this is interesting, our own culture is invisible to us. Yet, They are the context that we operate and make sense of the world. So we are operating within our own culture, or our own way to view the world, but we don't really think about it. When we encounter a culture that's different from our own, one of the things that we're faced with is a set of beliefs that manifest themselves in behaviors that are different from our own, that are different from our own values and beliefs. So let's come over here to this question. It says, so when we see or hear something and think to ourselves, man, that was weird, or why did she just do that? We see that behavior differently because it's not the same as our own cultural practice. So we view someone else's choice, word choice, language, behavior, body language differently, and we judge that behavior because it's different from our own. But when people in our own culture do something, we don't really think about it because we do that thing too. We share that value or that body language or those words within our own culture. So we don't really think about it as different. Let's continue. It says, in this way, we often talk about other people's cultures and not so much about our own. Our own culture is often hidden from us, and we frequently describe it as, it's just the way things are. Nonetheless, one's beliefs and actions are not any more natural or biologically predetermined than any other group's set of beliefs and actions. So let's come over here. I do have a question. What does predetermined mean? What does that word mean? Again, think about the word parts and the prefix there. And then what does biologically predetermined mean? So think about predetermined and then add the word biologically in front of it. Now what does it mean? Okay. So we're going to go back to the text. They have emerged from the way one's own group has dealt with and interpreted particular conditions that it has faced. As conditions change, so do cultures. Thus, cultures are considered to be dynamic. Okay, so I have a few questions here. So what this is saying here over on the side, that we're not necessarily born with culture. We inherit culture. We're not born with a set of beliefs and actions. Those things are taught to us over time. We inherit them from our family, our friends, from the culture that we're in, neighborhoods, the culture that we're around. And then these things change over time because the world is changing, because our groups are changing. So let's look at this question that I have here at the end of this. And we're going to come over here. So what does this word, do you think, dynamic mean? When we say that cultures are dynamic, what does that word mean? All right, last part. Individual differences within cultures and the dynamic nature of culture. So individual cultural identity presents another layer of complexity. Members of the same culture vary widely in their belief and action. So this word vary, V-A-R-Y, means to be different, okay? So how can we explain how people can be in the same culture but be different from one another? And so I have a question about that. Let's go over here to the side and look at it. So I want you to think about your own family. Do you think and act and speak exactly like your family members? Probably not. You have your own identity, even though you share cultural characteristics with your family. All right, back to the text. The argument for a distributive model of culture addresses the relationship between culture and personality. This argument posits that individuals select beliefs, values, and ideas that guide their actions from a larger set of cultural beliefs, values, and ideas. So in most cases, we don't consciously pick and choose attributes. We don't pick and choose which things we want. The conditions and events in our lives lead us to favor some of those over the others. So to summarize what he's saying is, he's got this idea of cultural heritage, which is different than cultural inheritance. So cultural heritage is what refers to what society as a whole possesses. So the whole group has the same set of things. And cultural inheritance means what each of us possesses. So what we take away from that cultural heritage, we inherit those things. So in other words, each individual inherits some, but not all of the cultural heritage of the group. So we don't have all of that culture. We pick and choose and create kind of our new, like a new group of culture. We recreate our own version of that culture. We all have unique identities that we develop within our culture, but these identities are not fixed, or one of the words is static. This is the reason that stereotypes don't hold up. No two individuals from any culture are exactly alike. So what's a stereotype is my first question. And then what's he saying is wrong with stereotypes? Based on what he says here, what's wrong with having a stereotype? How does that not work? While living inside a culture allows members to become familiar with the total cultural heritage of that society, no individually actually internalizes the entire cultural heritage. So, in fact, it'd be impossible for any one person to possess a whole society's cultural heritage. They are inevitably complex and contradictory. There's a different set of values, beliefs, and ideas within a cultural heritage, and that is the result of conditions and events that individuals and groups experience. So you might be grow up in the same house and have the same parents and you have siblings, but your brothers and sisters might act and treat people and talk and have different belief systems than you, even though you all grew up in the same house or your parents taught you a certain thing. That might be something that you all practice differently within your same household. Okay.